Right, in the last spot. I'll be acknowledging some of the things that I've been hearing today as I go along. There will be Clausewitz. There will be bikers. There will not be any watermelons, though. This is somewhat of a different subject for me. I speak, I lecture, I teach on military ethics at Staff College in the UK and around the world. But this afternoon, in what time I have left, I'm going to address something which is a little bit closer to home for me. It's actually about my hometown, the town that I grew up in and that I'm fortunate enough to continue to live in now and bring up my own family there. It's about Wootton Bassett, now known as Royal Wootton Bassett. It's a little bit of background. It's often described as a rather sleepy Wiltshire town. It's home to about 11,000 people. It's most definitely nothing remarkable about it, demanding public attention. Beyond, this is its position. You can see broadly in the south of England, about halfway between Bristol and Reading, so about an hour from London. There's nothing particularly remarkable about it. It has some good schools. It's got a good community, which, because of the proximity of several military establishments, was certainly very familiar with the military community as well. So it has very good links, for example, with the nearby Royal Air Force Base at Lynham, which is until recently the home of our Hercules fleet. But there's nothing particularly remarkable about it. It has the town hall built in 1690, atop 15 pillars in which the local market used to take place. And most importantly, it has some particularly fine pubs, including the Five Bells, which is my local. But none of this necessarily brought it to international attention. But circumstances changed. I mentioned RAF Lynham. Now, Wootton Bassett lies about 5 miles from RAF Lynham. You can see it here, so the detail's not terribly good. But here's RAF Lynham. Here's Wootton Bassett. And far over there is Oxford. It's the M4, the main transport link. What this meant for Wootton Bassett was that for a time, RAF Bryce Norton in Oxfordshire was unable to take heavy transport aircraft. So what? Well, that means that all of the repatriated dead from Afghanistan were taken to RAF Lynham from 2007. They landed here. We have a policy of bringing all of our soldiers home. We haven't got time to go into that, but this echoes some of the things that we've already heard over the course of today. All of the repatriated casualties, all of the dead, are brought through to Oxford, to the John Radcliffe Hospital, where there's a specialist military pathology unit. They all have to go there. It's part of the process. But that means they all pass through Wootton Bassett, just here. So for a period of just over 3 years, they all passed through Wootton Bassett. The first repatriation took place through Wootton Bassett in April 2007. The mayor at that time, the local mayor, they have very little power. They're elected by the community. In political terms, it's not particularly important. It's more about being the figurehead for the local community, really. But the local mayor at that time was Percy Miles. He was told that a hearse was going to be coming through with a repatriated soldier in it, and decided to wear his mayor's robes and stand by the war memorial in Wootton Bassett as the car came through. There was no fanfare, there was no fuss, the car just came through, but the mayor stood there. That was Aaron Lincoln, who was 18, and Danny Wilson, who was 28. At that time, a couple of local Royal British Legion, which is the British equivalent of a Veterans Society. The local British Legion members happened to be in the High Street at the time, and afterwards held a meeting where they decided that it would be a good idea to find out when the next one was going to happen, so that the event could be marked a little bit more formally and that people could pay their respects. So between 2000 and 2008, the number of people gathering started to grow. The Royal British Legion began to alert the local community about what was going to be happening. About 150 people would be informed at a time by email, and a further 70 people by telephone calls. And those who were free would come out and pay their respects in that high street that you can see at the top there. They'd come out. It was, again, there was nothing fancy about it. People would just come out at about the time they knew the repatriation was coming through and just line the street, just show their respects. It started to be put on the Wootton Bassett Council website, and the Royal British Legion, as it started to grow, realised that they needed to appoint a repatriations officer to cope with the interest from the local community. Even with the local communications network, which involved liaising with RAF Whetham so that they knew when the family was going to be travelling through, quite often the family would travel with the coffin from RAF Whetham through to Oxford. But it was often quite a long wait for the people who would come out. It was, I know the local mayor at the time was most indignant when the town was criticised for profiteering from this, because the point was that all the local businesses were basically, they couldn't open while the repatriations were taking place. The streets were clogged up. It was, there was no local business going on for this period, and quite often, if the repatriation was supposed to be happening at, say, 12 o'clock, it didn't actually happen until 2, so nothing happened for that period. So there's definitely no profiteering going on. It gradually grew and started to gather more and more media attention. In July 2009, for example, the bodies of 8 soldiers were repatriated. 3 of those were killed as they rushed to rescue Afghan National Army comrades who were injured in an earlier blast. This is the type of thing that got increased media attention, and for the first time relatives started to applaud and throw flowers on the coffins in the cars as they went past. By the summer of 2009, there was a growing sense of unease in the local community about the attention that was being focused on Wootton Bassett. The residents were starting to complain that the media was increasingly intrusive and turning the repatriations into a circus. Throughout the high street, it's only 100 yards or so long, but from this building onwards, all the way down to the other end, would be media vehicles with satellites on the top, photographers standing on step ladders. The local community was basically being pushed out, and more people, because of the attention that was being gathered on the town, more and more people were coming in from outside. The mayor at the time called a press conference and was quite indignant in his defence of what Wootton Bassett was trying to do, which was not create a media circus, it was simply to show respect. And the mayor at the time pointed out that, whilst all the media was focusing on Wootton Bassett, actually the Royal British Legion were manning every single lay-by on the 20-mile route all the way through to Oxford. The police at Gable Cross Police Station in Swindon would all come out and show their respects. But none of this was getting any attention. Everything was focused on this one little town as if this was all that was happening and as this was all that mattered. And it was becoming extremely intrusive and very much changing the character of what was happening. It probably came to a head in November 2009 when the body of bomb disposal expert Olaf Schmidt was repatriated. His very dignified widow, Christina, grabbed headlines when she was the first to applaud the hearse as it came through. So the attention became that Wootton Bassett was now applauding the dead, whereas in fact it was the wife of the deceased who was applauding the dead. the media particularly enjoyed, and I say enjoyed because it was the media, they really did enjoy this one, because his dog was in the hearse behind. His dog, his bomb disposal dog, did not die in the blast, but died apparently from sorrow 2 days later because his owner had been killed, though he was unharmed. A particularly charged repatriation took place again in November 2009 when the bodies of 5 soldiers killed by a rogue Afghan national policeman were brought home. So it was getting larger and larger. In June 2010 we had 7 servicemen killed in 4 separate incidents, all coming through at the same time. 2 had been killed in firefights, 1 in an explosion, and 4 died when their vehicle rolled over into a ditch. As I say, this was continued. This is a very regular occurrence, once or twice a week in Wootton Bassett. The final repatriation took place, this is between spring 2007 and August 2011. The 167th repatriation took place. 345 dead men and women had been repatriated through Wootton Bassett, and each and every one had been marked by the town. At this point, the repatriations returned to RAF Bryce Norton. The runway had been resurfaced. The repatriations returned there, and RAF Lynham was to close. The flag was lowered the last time on the 31st of August in a very moving sunset ceremony. So what was the responses? Well, the military were extremely appreciative. We'll start there. Even before the media attention was really focused on the town, the chiefs of staff organised a thank you parade in the town. The bands from each of the 3 services turned up, and basically it was a thank you to the town. This took place in 2008. In 2010, the mayor, at that time Councillor Mary Champion, and the deputy mayor and the local MP were met by the Prime Minister at number 10, Downing Street, for him to express his thanks to the people of Wootton Bassett in an informal meeting. The mayor was being invited to things like the Daily Sun, our very big popular newspaper, was being invited to host or to attend awards ceremony, and then was being humbled by being presented awards on behalf of Wootton Bassett for the service to the military that the town was doing. And each and every time he was humbled and extremely embarrassed by this, because the town wasn't doing it for any sort of recognition. I told you there was bikers. I'm not going to let you down. Veterans on bikes were turning up more and more frequently, and interestingly, going a lot with what we've heard this morning. At the start, this was causing quite some consternation amongst the local population. At these dignified events, a whole group of bikers were turning up, parking on the pavement, blocking everybody, and really looking quite scary. And it took a little while before the locals got the message that they certainly weren't here to cause trouble. It was the Royal British Legion bikers who were turning up, and they were following the hearse all the way through from RAF Lynham all the way through to Oxford. And they became a very, very, they were there at every single repatriation. But they also started organising charity events where, quite literally, tens of thousands of bikes would descend upon Wootton Bassett and completely stop everything for the entire day as they rode through. It's quite a sight to behold. Obviously, it also got royal recognition. There was a royal visit in January 2010. Prince Charles and Camilla attended the flagpole dedication in the snow on that day. The media attention really was quite extraordinary during this period, and it just kept increasing. The BBC's flagship current affairs programme is Question Time. It's an agenda-setting programme. It happens once a week on Thursdays. It's a very, very high-profile event, and they decided to hold it in Wootton Bassett. against the wishes of the local community. The local mayor refused to participate despite being invited. Not a single member of the councillors who were elected by the community attended, regardless of the political party they represented. The local MP would not sit on the panel for question time. Nobody officially from the local community was present at that programme, which was quite extraordinary. But the argument was that it was not about Wootton Bassett, and the programme was just following the media trend of turning it into being about Wootton Bassett. The decision of the local councillors, I probably was vindicated by the way that the panel was, in fact, eventually formed. It was heavily military focused. General Sir Richard Dannett, who was the former head of the army, he was there. He was at this point in time a fierce critic of the government. You can do that once you're retired. Lord Paddy Ashdown, an ex-Royal Marine, former High Representative in the Balkans. Bill Reppel, the Armed Forces Minister, was there. The first question from the floor asked if bankers' bonuses should be given to the troops in Afghanistan instead. Every single question in the hour-long programme had something to do with the war, the extremely unpopular war, and about the politics of the conflict, effectively, which is exactly what the local leaders were worried about. Interestingly, the local chaplain, the Reverend Canon Reverend Thomas Woodhouse, independently chose to take a very, very similar line as the local elected leaders. He was criticised by a Northern Irish chaplain for not making more of the religious aspect of the repatriations. He was told he could have made a huge thing about this. But he was there for nearly every repatriation, but he refused to stand in his robes. He was there in his dog collar, but not in his robes. He was there to support the local community and the families, but he did not want to make religious capital out of the event in the same way that the local politicians and the local member of parliament refused to make political capital out of what was going on. Others, however, were not quite so kind. The very, very hard to keep politics out of it. The chap right in the middle of that photo, just there, that's a sniper sight. Nick Griffin, leader of the British National Party, particularly nasty right-wing group. The English Defence League, both of these groups attempted to make political capital out of showing their support for Britain by attending these events very, very publicly. Both groups received very hostile short shrift from the local public, who basically just completely ignored them and refused were quite happy to block their view, for example. In January 2010, the media reported that Islam for UK were proposing to march through Wootton Bassett to highlight the deaths of the Muslim civilians in the conflict. The Prime Minister denounced the proposals immediately. Right-wing groups proposed counter-marches through the High Street and assured Wootton Bassett that it would be protected from the Muslim onslaught. The press was incandescent with rage at this apparent infringement of, not quite sure infringement of what, but they were incandescent with rage at what was being proposed. Actually, of course, Islam for UK never even lodged an application to hold a march. They didn't need to. The press attention they received from merely suggesting it was phenomenal. So there was no need for them to do anything at all. My wife's solution, had they have marched, was that the people of Wootton Bassett would probably have turned out and showed their respect for the coffins carrying the civilians in exactly the same way, but we never found out whether that would have happened. The charged atmosphere at the time, however, is borne out by the on Armistice Day in the United Kingdom, on the 11th day of the 11th month, as the armistice was signed, we hold a ceremony throughout the country, the Remembrance Day parade and a Remembrance Day service. And during the year that this was in the political eye, a young man was arrested for burning a poppy, which was the symbol of the Armistice Day, during a Remembrance Day service. He was arrested. He was found guilty of a calculated and deliberate insult to the dead and those who mourn them. And in a very British response to that, he was found guilty and fined a whole £50 for that. Wootton Bassett was also accused from some corners of the press, who were particularly anti the war that was going on, of grief tourism, promoting this grief tourism. And what was initially a dignified response then turned into applause, and then the flowers throwing. It started to turn into extremely emotional displays, so I have some sympathy with this idea, grief tourism. But of course it was the families of those who were being repatriated that were coming to Wootton Bassett who were the emotional members of the people. The people of Wootton Bassett were still, as they had started off, lining the streets in silence, showing their respect. On the whole, the outpouring of grief was seen to be a little bit Death of Princess Diana-like. It was it's very un-British to show that level of emotion on the whole. But the Wootton Bassett was also used as a demonstration of the hypocrisy of the political classes. Royal patronage followed. The Wootton Bassett was granted the royal prefix in March 2011 by the Queen in recognition of its role. It was officially conferred on the 16th of October 2011. It's the first to be bestowed on a town in over 100 years, and it joins the only other two royal towns in the country, Royal Leamington Spa and Royal Tunbridge Wells. There was, at the time, a public campaign to recognise the town, but this was not sought by the town itself. It was sought by people outside of the town. The town council itself was heavily resistant. Councillor Steve Bucknell, who had been mayor in 2008, Chris Wannell, who was mayor at the time, stated publicly that the local people did not want to be recognised. They did not seek or want rewards. However, it did go ahead anyway, and it ended up a little bit embarrassing, but being broadly appreciated by the town, whose main comment was, are we going to have the signs replaced? At a ceremony in October 2011, letters patent were presented to the town by the Princess Royal on behalf of the Queen. The local band that I play with was there, along with the Royal Marine Band, the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary, the Chief of the General Staff. More impressively, I think, was the Globemaster, the Hercules, and the Vulcan, one of the last flights of the Vulcan flyover down the High Street. Very quickly, I'm very conscious of time, I'll just take you through some of the feedback over the next 2 days that was coming through on the BBC blogs at the time. This is the feedback. Very proud to be a Bassetter today. I'm very grateful that Her Majesty has given Wootton Bassett his royal name now. It is for the little town who has come out, rain or shine, warm or utterly freezing, to honour the war dead who have served this country. We are not a morbid town at all, just one who came to show our respects and support the families in their time of greatest need. And that's summed up, as you see, that's number 222 of a huge number. This was just a 2-hour opening. They had to close it because of the number of comments coming through on the BBC website. There's a comment there, number 157, from a serving Royal Marine, just saying that this was the good people of Wootton Bassett deserved the honour. Here was from somebody who had stood there to mourn somebody, thanking the town. Here's a message from a British Muslim. I welcome this proposal. It's important. Those fallen for the cause of our nation should be respected, and hence the importance of the rename. It's another matter that I don't necessarily agree with the Iraq or Afghan war, at least the way it's being fought. And that, I think, is also summed up in this one. I abhor war, but this is not about war or who started it or what it's all for. It's about respect. And I think this is particularly interesting because, to me, this is what, we get to the implications. I think this is what it really is about. Intuitively, people understand this distinction, this gap between a war which was extremely unpopular and the people who were fighting in that war. Promised you Clausewitz. Oops, I've gone the wrong way. I promised you Clausewitz. I shall not disappoint. there is an intuitive grasp of the distinction between the two levels, and Clausewitz sums this up very, very well. Obviously, here's my one bit of German. Wunderlich Dreifaltigkeit? Yeah? Any good? Okay. That was okay then, yeah? We're very familiar with the paradoxical trinity, but we also know that it has to manifest itself in reality, and the way that we're most used to thinking of that is in the bottom right-hand corner there. The government, state and policy, the people on the bottom one side, and the military on the other. It's no accident, I think, that during this period the civil-military covenant in the UK was getting increasing attention. It was drafted in 1998, but suddenly started to actually get real attention from all quarters, from the great and the good, from academics, from the military. And then a task force was appointed and reported on it in 2010. I think what's clear is there was a huge improvement in one respect, which I'll just use this to illustrate. It was only 6 years ago that British soldiers returning from Afghanistan and Iraq were warned not to wear their uniforms in public, because the war was so unpopular. If you were outside in a public area in Britain, if you went shopping or you were in a hospital and you were wearing a British Army uniform or a British military uniform, you were quite likely to be spat on or assaulted by a member of the public. What Wootton Bassett did in this respect was quite profound, I think. Through this process, this bit got fixed. The relationship between the people and the military got patched up in quite a profound way. And in many ways, this is an extremely strong relationship now. What became increasingly broken here was, rather than the military necessarily being associated with the war itself, there became a fracture between here. The government almost stopped bothering to explain why we were at war to the people. And on this side, the government started to get increasing grief and increasing criticism for not supporting the armed forces in the task that they had been sent to do. So this was manifesting itself in terms of equipment shortages, under-strength battalions, lack of veteran support or PTSD support, this kind of thing. So the actual... the trinity was certainly itself as a whole not healthy, but the relationship between the people and the armed forces, many people saw as having been at least addressed, possibly repaired by this. The tone of the media coverage at this point is also important. It's very, very clear. The tone of the war coverage, partly due to a lack of embedded quality journalism, partly because there was very few journalists in theatre at all, and partly due to a lack of news time, although it was actually some extremely good news coverage and analysis coming out of this. It was only seen by a tiny minority of people who watched detailed news programmes. So therefore, the public's view of Afghanistan was actually just about the repatriations. It was just about Wootton Bassett. It was just about the casualties and the tearful relatives. And the government, as I said, had completely given up trying to justify Britain's presence in this. You can see here, this is just from the local news. 3 more heroes return home. Swindon mourns Marines. Another sad day. Their proudest day. Another Monday, another tribute. How many more Mr. Brown, who was the Prime Minister at the time? This was the tone of... This was the news about the Afghan war. There was no good news stories. There was no strategic aims. There was no... This was all the public is getting, or was getting, about the war in Afghanistan. And the media was really quite obsessed with this, and it was just focusing on milestones. The first woman, June 2008, the first woman casualty. The first officer, Lieutenant Colonel Thorneyloe. The 300th casualty. The 100th casualty this year. The 10th casualty this month. All of the press was focusing on the personal tragedies of those left behind because it was easy. It was easy. The government was very aware of this. The drip, drip, drip of media coverage was extremely damaging. Here's from the Daily Telegraph, which is typical of many. This is the attempt to manage the new arrangements. As the repatriations moved from RAF Lynham to Bryce Norton, there was a huge storm about the fact that, you won't be able to see the writing there probably or not, but it was alleged that the Ministry of Defence was seeking to take the dead out of the back door of Bryce Norton so that they wouldn't have another Wootton Bassett effect. They wanted to move them down side streets rather than through another town so that they wouldn't have to worry about this again. And this was, we're talking several 100,000 outraged comments on Facebook. It was absolutely, the public criticism was huge, the public outrage, and thought that the government was trying to hide the fallen soldiers. Actually, Carterton took over from Wootton Bassett and has done a superb job of handling it. They have a dedicated remembrance garden. That's the flag that used to fly in Wootton Bassett, flying there. But what is definitely true is that they do not receive the same level of media coverage as Wootton Bassett used to. Their first repatriation was in 2011. That was Royal Marine Sergeant Barry Weston, who became the first soldier through Bryce Norton. And he actually had a massive public reception. So in conclusion, on the one hand, I'm pleased that the military is no longer blamed for a decision that the military did not take, a decision taken by a democratically accountable government representing the people. The military are no longer the scapegoat, if you like. But my fear is that even while this part of the military covenant looks more healthy now, I think it's actually very damaged by the events of the last few years. And I think it's summed up by these slides. These are the images, these are the only really consistent messages relating to the conflict that the British public is seeing even today. And I believe that this is actually highly damaging to the Covenant and to civil-military relations in the long run. Instead of empathy, the British public now appear to have sympathy for the soldiers, who are forced to go and fight in a pointless war for who knows what reason, to lay down their lives in service of their government policy rather than on behalf of the state. I have yet to meet a British soldier or officer anywhere who wants sympathy. Understanding, yes. Perhaps occasionally thanks once a year, maybe. But definitely not, I've never yet one who wants to be pitied for doing their job.